Okay.
Yeah, I'm recording now.
Okay.
So what does the name Gangaji mean?
My teacher, Papaji, gave me this name, and it refers to the river Ganga, or Ganges, as we say in English. Ganga is much more beautiful than Ganges. And that was his river. That's actually where I met him. I met him on the banks of the Ganga in Hardwar. And one night, one morning when I came over for our morning meetings, he said, "Oh, I dreamed of the river Ganga last night. That will be your name." Because really he didn't appreciate Western names. He thought that they were nonsensical, since they didn't refer to anything bigger than the individual. So my name was Tony, and some people still call me Tony and know me as Tony, but he would say, Tony, what does this mean? It was just like a series of grunts, so primitive to him. And he often gave people names because he was inspired or because he just couldn't relate to Western names. So it refers to the river, and then he told me to add the G onto it when he asked me to speak to people and to teach, and because that's a form of respect. He said, so people will pay respect to you. So at first I thought, well, I won't use the name because I wasn't really into Eastern names, well, certainly not Westerners going and acquiring Eastern names. So I was a little embarrassed even. But when he asked me to teach, I knew this was a name I should carry for the teaching. And I'm honored to carry it because it's part of our connection. And the river is the river that we're all part of, the stream of life. So it's meaningful. And yet it's like all names, it is just a name, finally.
And to go back to your childhood, I think you spent that in Mississippi. You had experiences as a child which you now attribute to being spiritual experiences.
Well, I can attribute them to be spiritual, and in another context, I could also attribute them to be, anxiety attacks. So I really believe any experience that we have is defined by the context that it appears in, or the cultural context that defines it. So at the time, it was very uncomfortable. It wasn't spiritual in the sense of elevation. The one I'm primarily referring to is when I was about 6. I experienced my body disappearing. It went through a series of, it would get very, very large and filled with air, but not in a happy balloon sense, in a horrifying, terrifying way. And then it would get very narrow, like thin, like a piece of paper thin. And this was a phenomenal experience. It was terrifying to me. And then it would disappear, and I had no body. And I ran to my mother and told her about this. I'm sure I was crying, and it terrified her too. She had no idea, and so we went to the secular priest, which was a psychiatrist, and he gave me some medicine, actually phenobarbital, which was a small amount, but every time I experienced this, I was to take one of these little pills, and it's true, I did start to experience it again. I would take one of these pills, and the experience would stop. And it was not until I was in college, and maybe I would have to take a pill once a year, twice a year, but I realized I had to stop taking these little pills. And then later, for I guess some years, even decades later, I was in meditation, and this experience started to occur, and along with the horror that had been connected with it. But because I was in meditation, and it was a meditative context, very different from my cultural context of being a little girl having this horrific experience happen, I just let it be. I let it happen. I didn't like it initially, and I was afraid of it initially, but I just let it happen, and I was astounded in that as I simply stopped fighting it, it naturally just opened into a field of bliss and ease, and the very opposite of what I had thought it was, and the very opposite of what it was as I fought it. So it resulted in a spiritual experience. I think that many people, and maybe children, but people of all ages, have certain experiences that are out of the ordinary. That in fact, that's very ordinary, to have extraordinary experiences. And if we don't have the support for honoring the experience, or just letting the experience in all of its discomfort move through us, then it becomes something that we run from or hide from in our lives. So for many years after that experience, I felt that there was something deeply, profoundly wrong with me, and that I had to maintain a presence on top of that flaw or dysfunction. And even if I didn't verbalize it that way, it was something I identified myself as. So I'd speak of it in support of other people recognizing they may have had dysfunctions of the nervous system or of the mind stream or spiritual experiences, and that all of that can be honored and open to, and then there's a deeper discovery.
And from Mississippi, what took you to San Francisco?
Freedom. This was in the early 70s. I was actually teaching school in Memphis, Tennessee, and Woodstock, the movie Woodstock, came out, and my husband and I, my first husband and I, went to see it, and we both said, yes, this is the way to live. What are we doing? Living the way we are. And we had already started to experiment. I mean, it was the time of the civil rights movement, and we had marched and stood up for civil rights, and the anti-Vietnam movement was starting. And so we'd been a part of it politically, but we recognized there was a freedom, a cultural freedom that was not present in our Southern lives. And so that was what started it. And that was an attraction for the counterculture that San Francisco really demonstrated. And a few years after that, we actually moved to San Francisco, and it was an escape for me. It was an escape from the South, which for me had felt very constricted, and I didn't meet the definitions of what it meant to be the ideal Southern woman. I think very few could. And I felt a failure as that, although I, of course, now recognize that failure was really the impetus that got me out of the South and to San Francisco. And San Francisco was just exploding in this exquisite way, which later had its own implosion, but at that point was just in this, it was just beautiful. It was wonderful. I saw that I could be myself and not be perfect, and that there was room for that, and there was a relative freedom of personality, freedom of experimentation, and also a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood, where people were just naturally identifying one another as family, and I loved it. It was a great experience. It was pivotal in my development.
And is that where you started practicing meditation?
Yes, some years after that. I mean, at first I was practicing having a good time. I have to say I was practicing hedonism. And while that was very pleasurable, there was a sense of a dead end that came along with that. And so there were spiritual events happening all the time. And I went to see a number of gurus. I went to see Baba Muktananda, and other teachers came through. The S training was happening then. And so all of that affected me. But finally, a neighbor said to me, you need to take a timer, just a kitchen timer, and set it for 20 minutes and just sit there and don't move for 20 minutes. Because he recognized my nervous system was so all over the map that I just needed to come back in. And so I listened to him, and it rang true, and I did that, and it was excruciating. Those early sessions of just taking a kitchen timer and setting it for 20 minutes, I would take the timer and shake it. I thought, it must be broken, it's not working. But finally, I could sit for 20 minutes twice a day, and then I started then actually more deeply exploring different teachers that were coming through. I later got very involved with the Tibetan Buddhist, and after that, Zen Buddhism and Vipassana, and they were all primarily, from my point of view, concerned with deep meditation. So I fell in love with it, but it was difficult in the beginning.
And you also trained and worked as an acupuncturist.
Yes, that was then in the 1979, so I had a lot of experiences by then, and I had experienced getting acupuncture and really benefiting hugely from that in my body and my emotions. And so I wanted to do that. It seemed like a good way to focus my life. I actually came to England to study with a teacher in England because there were no schools in California then, or in America, I don't think. There was no accreditation or licensing, and I studied in Leamington Spa with Dr. Worsley. And it was a wonderful experience. I practiced it for 10 years and benefited hugely from it, in particular from just switching my Western materialistic mindset to an Eastern fluid, cyclical, non-material mindset. It was, I think, really good for my brain, and it was very good just in terms of expanding and opening. And I can't even say I understand how Chinese medicine works, but I know that it does work. I still receive acupuncture. I benefit from it. But once I met Papaji, that was all finished.
But from San Francisco, I think you went to Hawaii.
Yes. I had an acupuncture practice. My husband had a practice in neurolinguistics, and we were practicing in San Francisco and living in Mill Valley, and we had a house, and we were living a good life, but we were also recognizing that in living this life at the speed we were living it, we were overlooking something essential in our natures, that we had actually betrayed something deeper. And so our intention was to move to Maui to set up a healing center. But we sold our house in California and we moved to Maui, and we almost did get a healing center, but we lost it. We didn't have the money, the funds to pay for it. And so there we were in Maui, which is paradise, but we didn't know, well, what are we doing here? We weren't there just for the pleasure of paradise. We really wanted our lives to contribute to healing, to awakening. And so we were both sort of at odds then, and that's when we started praying for a teacher, praying for some direction. We recognized that we had individually and together gone as far as we could go on our own. And I never at that point had wanted a guru or a teacher. I had assumed as an independent Westerner that certainly I could do it myself. But that was a humbling, and it was a recognition I can't do it myself. I don't know really what to do. Help. I did a prayer for help.
And is it at that time that you met Andrew Cohen?
Yes. I was living on Maui, and a friend of mine said, you have to come see this man. He's back from India. And I went to see him, and I was quite moved, and his energy was wonderful. But even more importantly than that, he was speaking in a way that wasn't like a translation from Tibetan text or Pali text or Indian text. He was speaking as a Westerner in the vernacular of the Western idiom. And that was so striking, and he was filled with confidence. And that was striking. I hadn't seen Western teachers in that mode. I had seen Eastern teachers filled with confidence, but mostly Western teachers continually deferred to their Eastern guru or to some tradition, and it was so refreshing. It was wonderful. And so I attended events for about a month with Andrew, and my husband Eli came and attended events, and he also was quite struck. And then we went back to Maui, and we were still called for something, and Eli was anyway going to, he was actually going to Sikkim to try to join this conference where he could meet up with Jamgol Kongtrul, who was a teacher we had both connected with in the Tibetan tradition, who since died. That was the last one, and there's a new one now. And he was going, and he ended up in Lucknow, and he called me, and he said, "What's that teacher's name who Andrew Cohen was with?" He said, "I'm in Lucknow." I think he was from Lucknow, and I got Andrew's book, and I looked at, the book was my master myself, and I looked in the front of it, and he said it's H.W.L. Punja. So Eli looked him up in the phone book, and there was an H.W.L. Punja in the phone book, and he called him up, and his son answered, and he said, "Come over." And he went over, he knocked on his door. His son, Surendra, opened the door, and he said, "Oh, come in, he's waiting for you." And it was so miraculous because Papaji had just gotten out of the hospital from a diabetic attack, and he was all alone. And so Eli got to be with him for 5 days, just in his room, his small little room in this small little house, and just receive this transmission. And he was also writing me, and I would receive these letters from him, and they were alive, they were vibrating. And in the letters, he said, "This is the real thing. He is so available. You've got to come. You've got to come." And he came back and got me, and then I went and met Papaji and was floored and was welcomed deeply by him. And then he and Andrew were having some difficulties, and he then asked me to come out and speak to people. I have to say, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not ready. This must be a mistake. And he said, I said, "I haven't read any of the books. I don't know what Ramana says." He said, "You just speak from your direct experience. You don't have to teach anybody anything." And in that, there was an opening where I recognized people wouldn't be coming to hear me, Gangaji, or me, Tony. They were coming to hear what it is that had arisen, that had revealed this deep fulfillment. They were coming to hear the truth. And so all I had to do was get out of the way and relate my experience. And so I found that to be quite trustworthy over the years.
And when you initially met Papaji, did he tell you to be still?
Well, the way I remember it is that he said, "Oh, what are you here for?" in the very first meeting. And the word that came out was freedom. I mean, there are many words that could have come out. I could have said enlightenment or happiness, but I said freedom. And he said, "Oh, good, you're in the right place." And I recognized I was in the right place. I felt his energy. I knew I had prayed for a teacher. And I said, "Oh, tell me what to do. I'm here. Tell me what to do." And I realized that in asking that question, I assumed he would give me a practice or a mantra, or he would tell me some specific way to change my life or live my life. And he said, "Just stop. Stop everything." And I this was a shock to me, because it was not at all what I assumed he would say. And I found that to always be true of Papaji. You could not assume anything. He was uncontrollable in that way. And in that stopping, I pretty quickly recognized he didn't mean stop breathing, he didn't mean stop moving, he didn't mean stop eating. It was referring to the activity of my search. Stop searching. Stop trying to get something. Stop trying to accumulate anything. And that's really the same as what you say, be still. Because in that stopping, it's really the same as open. He could have said open, just open. And when you stop the movement of mind, it's open. And in that openness, there is the revelation, freshly, every time, of what is always here. So I'm still discovering this stop and opening. And he said, and I have found it to be true thus far in his language, that there's no end to what is revealed. There's no end to the revelation, to the realization. It's your own self.
And is this what you're sharing in satsang today?
Well, yes. Yes, I am. Sometimes I don't use the word stop. I found that language has to adapt to the situation, and I often say stop, and often people hear that as stop. You're like a teacher would say, stop. Now just be still, stop. And so it becomes a layer of stopping or an imposition of stillness. So I may use the word open, and then I engage with people, but always what I'm teaching is really not a teaching. It's really what is here that has always been here is the truth of yourself. And in an instant of not following the movement of mind while staying conscious, you can directly discover that radiant, fulfilled truth. Then the mind may get active, but once that discovery has been recognized, the power of thought shifts from the leader to the follower. The thought then becomes the follower of consciousness, rather than in our Western world in particular, but probably in all cultures, thought becomes the leader. We think what it is we need to have, and so we form our experience on that. This was a totally radical shift for me, where what is my experience? What is this direct experience? And then what thought follows that? And so there were thoughts that followed of understanding or insight or revelation or denial or self-doubt, but none of them could dislodge the direct experience. And so really what I'm offering people is an invitation to directly discover what does not come and go. Our thoughts come and go, and they change, and we agree or disagree with them at one time or another, even in a day or an hour. But this presence of oneself, and not presence as elevated presence or comfortable presence or uncomfortable presence, just the underlying omnipresence that is always here, is conscious and is who you are. So I'm assisting people, supporting people, inviting people, challenging people to discover that directly and freshly. And that's how I'm used. And of course it's for my own self too, because in that I get to discover freshly. And through others, it's so thrilling to watch how immediately with someone can say, oh, I have this fear, or I have these obstacles, or I have this thing that I'm stuck. But if we just apply self-inquiry, where we just turn attention back into the stuckness or the fear or the despair, where it's experienced in the body, but without fighting that or trying to make sense of that or following a narrative about that, just allowing the mind to open to that. Then it's like a trap door, and there's an opening into the spaciousness of being that our feelings appear in, our thoughts appear in, our circumstances appear in. But we tragically mostly overlook the spaciousness of being in our fixation on thoughts and events, feelings. So I'm just inviting people home.
And you've chosen 3 pieces of music for us. And I've got 2 from... are you familiar with the ones we've chosen from Katana?
Which ones?
Living Truth and Blessed Life.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Katana has such a transmission.
And also one from Rai Kuda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Transmission too.
Would you like to introduce us to one of those songs now?
Well, either one of Kirtana songs, although I think maybe it's good to end with Kirtana. Let's do the Rai Kuda song. I'm not sure which cut you chose, but any of them on that album, for me, it's so significant because I was born in the Mississippi Delta and I grew up in that medium. And Rai Kuda is taking the medium of Mississippi Delta blues, and he's also blending it with the River Ganga. So he calls it Ganga River Blues, I think. And so it has the Indian flavor blended with the Mississippi Delta flavor. So and it's very good music. He's a wonderful musician. So like all music, it's nonverbal and it just goes directly to some sense. And if you respond to it, you receive that particular transmission.
Thank you. And staying on the theme of music, do you practice chanting or mantra at all?
Sometimes at certain retreats that I give, there is someone who's leading chanting or singing, and I love that. I love the emotional opening and beauty of it. But I don't have a practice of chanting or mantra. When I was practicing Tibetan Buddhism, I had a mantra that I chanted, and I found it to be very useful for gathering the mind and all of its fragmentation and bringing it to a central point. So I support chanting, but with all practices I've found if you're doing it to get something, then that something you're trying to get, while you may have experiences of it, is always in the future. The more perfect something, the more perfect experience, the more perfect meditation. And when Papaji told me to stop, it really reversed all that. So that the chanting or the singing or the meditation, I love meditation, and every day I meditate 2 or 3 times, but it's coming from something, coming from the fulfillment and bathing in that fulfillment rather than trying to reach something and attain something. And that's the essence for me of how Papaji turned me right side up.
And staying on the theme of meditation, I mean, I think a lot of us still struggle with meditation. Could you share a quick practice or a brief practice with our listeners today?
Well, for me, the most simple meditation and also the most kinesthetically pleasant is to lie down, to not sit in a rigid posture, but to just lie down in a comfortable way and to give myself permission to be totally at ease and present with whatever is here, and allow my attention, my focus, to go inside. And at first it seems like going inside my body. So I may be aware of tension someplace, or I may be aware of some emotion in my body, and the willingness to not fix that or hide from that or fight that, but to continually go inside. So if it's a physical experience, it could be some contraction in my breath or in a muscle, and just to go inside that and to recognize there's no outcome, there's no right answer to this meditation. It's an experiential meditation, an inquiry. You're really inquiring what is here, but not a mental what is here, more just a natural experiential. And I give myself 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes more than an hour if it feels really good. Sometimes I go to sleep, but there's even permission for that, because sometimes I need to go to sleep. But with that permission, I have found, and without a goal outcome, there's a way that the mind-body relaxes, which is one of the great benefits of meditation, but also begins to naturally open to itself, so that the question, what is this attention? And then to go inside that, it's beautiful. I recommend it. It's very simple, and there are many meditations people can do. But I always find the more simple, the better. I did very complicated visualizations and mantra and prostrations, and I benefited hugely from that. I had great experiences, and I loved it. But finally, for me and my nervous system, for me, the better meditation, the one that actually supported the mind being more still and more open, was at that time moving from Tibetan Buddhist meditation, Vajrayana and Mahayana, into Zen practice, where it was just the breath. But even that I found I started to make very rigid. I had to be in a particular posture. My eyes had to be half open. And so in this one, there's no rules. It's a time to simply be with oneself.
And how do you feel about yoga? Do you have a yoga practice at all?
I love yoga. I love the body. I love moving the body, and I do stretching. I like Pilates, a kind of yogic Pilates, and this method called gyrotonics, which is like a fluid movement. I don't do the Bikram yoga, the heat yoga that has become really popular, or a very athletic yoga for my age or just my body. For me, just very gentle stretching, yogic stretching, with again the attention within, without the outcome being the goal. Just what is present when I stretch my arm in a particular way and move it. And I find it delightful. I don't prescribe it to people, but I know the body likes to move and the body likes to stretch, and I think different bodies like different kinds of movement and stretching. Some bodies benefit deeply and meditatively from running, so I support the variety of body awareness movements.
And Gangaji, where is your heart?
Where's my heart? My heart is here. It doesn't know what there is. It only knows here. And it finds itself everywhere. So it's maybe reflected in a heart emotion of openness and love, but even bigger than that, it's the totality of being.
And do you have an exercise? I mean, I've seen you with many of your people at your retreats where they'll come on stage, which will take people from the head to the heart.
Well, really, the exercise is telling the truth and beginning with the relative truth. So if someone comes on stage, there's usually some issue or something, unless they have just a report to give, but they're coming up with something that they feel is blocking them from what it is they want: peace, truth, fulfillment, enlightenment, happiness. And so the exercise is what my teacher gave me and what Ramana Maharshi gave him. It's self-inquiry. It's really turning the attention, rather than what do I need to do to get something, what is here? Who am I? What is this that is here? And often self-inquiry gets limited to a question like, who am I, or who is it who is feeling this? And that can be wonderful. The mind can just break open, and in that it's a meditation and exercise. But I like to use whatever the person is presenting. So if you're feeling a particular emotion now, or particular contraction in your body, or you're agitated in some ways, that's the beginning point. And so what is that if you drop the narrative about that, if you drop the storyline or the definitions about that, and simply stay conscious and let your attention fall into it. So if you fall into this I, or if you fall into the am, or if you fall into, say it's for a particular person, I'm sad. So if you fall into any of those, into the sadness, into the amness, the beingness, or into the I, you find the same, ultimately the same inconceivable radiance of being, that it's present as I, undefined by I am this body, I'm this person, I'm this gender. And it's found in amness, it's the same I, but it's also found in the core of the emotion that we think we have to fix to get back to the radiance. So to actually inquire into sadness or hopelessness or despair or self-hatred is first of all to stop the narrative, to be aware that there is usually a narrative. That's the first step. And to be willing to stop that and simply experience directly whatever is here. That's what I mean by the relative truth. And then from that, the absolute truth. It reveals itself. Since it's absolute, it's always here.
That's quite a practice.
It takes an instant, really.
And Gangaji, how would you define love?
Well, I would try not to define love. Love has been over-defined, I would say. And so I would say bigger than any definition we have of it. It is the same as the heart. It is that presence that we were speaking of earlier, that alive presence is not separate from love. I love the Sanskrit Sat Chit Ananda, which can be defined as beingness aware of itself as consciousness, and then overflowing in Ananda, sometimes translated as joy, but we can just as easily translate it as love. So in that sense, it is the natural state of self-recognition, which means that it is not limited by any particular mood. As I was just saying, it can be found in the core of sadness, which we think is the opposite or the lack of love or joy. But in the willingness to inquire into sadness, you find this spacious love in the core. And this is so counter to how we have defined love, or we've defined sadness. And that's where we are bound. We're usually bound by our definitions. So I'm actually quite serious when I say I would try not to define it. I would let it define me.
So we're going away from it being an emotion.
Yes, not limited to an emotion.
Yeah.
We know there are feelings that we associate with love. But if we do away with the word love, like we do away with the word God, or we do away with any word that has been so overused that it's actually become polluted with our thought forms to meaninglessness. So love becomes something on a greeting card, or becomes a sexual chemistry. So I'm not saying love is separate from any of that, but it's much more than any of that.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you that famous question somebody asked Papaji, and that would be, Gangaji, who are you?
He said, I think I am that. And I say, I am this. This you, this me, this all.
And to go on to one of the Katana tracks,
Mm-hmm.
which one would you choose?
Remind me which ones you have again?
We have Living Truth and Blessed Life.
Blessed Life. I can't quite recall Living Truth. I would have to hear a couple of words in it, I think. Her music and her lyrics are always so beautiful and such a transmission. Blessed Life just reverberates with our potential and our capacity to recognize how blessed it is to be and how wondrous it is that we are. And that's what gets overlooked when we follow what else we need. Certainly we have needs, but when we follow that rather than following the blessedness of life and the gifts that each of us have received in this life, that we have the time to listen, to watch a broadcast like this, that we have the wherewithal to not be having to look for our next meal. It's already a blessed life. And then the blessing of receiving the blessing, this can only be imparted by music or singing then.
And I've been introduced to Katana by you, but how did you find out about her work?
Well, she came to some meetings and we had some exchanges, and I remember one in particular, and I've heard her speak about this, when there was one where there was something that opened in her that I have never seen close. I know she's had, as we all have, challenges in our lives, but she has been true to that opening, and she has honored it in her singing and her work and in her life. She seems to me to be naturally a very sattvic kind of person, and so her music sometimes is quite lively, but it usually transmits this sattvic and yet emotionally rich, both yearning and resolution of that yearning.
And she's a very prolific songwriter. I couldn't
Yes.
believe how many albums I found.
Yes, I'm really familiar with her albums in the last 15 years or so. Her earlier albums, sometimes she would play songs from them and they were quite delightful, but once she had her profound opening, the character of her lyrics and her music really became so surrendered to the truth of who one is. And I've seen people just begin to cry, and I've watched openings just from hearing the music and listening to the lyrics too. It is both the musicality and the lyrics, and they come in both sides, I think, of the brain and meet in this surrender.
And you see many openings at your satsang and retreats.
Yes, I see many openings. I see closings to openings. I see resistance to opening. I see everything. But the sweetness and the point of our meetings is always the opening. And so sometimes it takes simply support of that opening. Sometimes it takes a challenge to how someone may be following a self-doubt or denial of the opening. And so the meetings have their own life, but they are always in support to the deepest opening that's possible and the recognition of the blessedness of that.
And if people want to find out more about your work, they can go to gangaji.org.
I should spell that because I think people have sometimes a hard time with the word Gangaji. It's GANGAJI.org. I was signing a book the other day and I misspelled it because it's, I don't know, maybe just English-speaking or Western minds, the consonants and the vowels don't seem to go together. So it's good to spell it.
Yeah, I think there is a project on at the moment to clean up the Ganga.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah.
That's really good news. I know that India has had a lot of money come into it with the tech sector growing so much, and they love that river, as they love all their rivers. They love the Yamuna. They love they really respect the nature and the holiness of water. The river that gives us our life is part of the same spirit. It's not separate. So that's good news. I'm glad to hear it. I went where I met Papaji at Hardwar. It was not so clean because there were a lot of people there, but upriver from Hardwar is Rishikesh, and a little upriver from Rishikesh is Ramjula and Laxmanjula, and oh, it was so beautiful there. We would swim in it there, and such an exquisite color, and also wild, and so I know it has the potential to be pure all the way to the Bay of Bengal.
And if people go to your website, there's a lot of free resources there.
Yes, there's a lot, and we're developing a new website where there'll be even more downloading, uploading, the whole availability. But there are definitely clips that can be watched, and clips can be found on YouTube, and there's an audio section and a section of reading. There's a section where we've scanned in the letters that I received from Papaji, the letters I wrote to Papaji. That's a very special section for me. And then there's also a section about the prison program we do, with a little clip that I just watched yesterday that I hadn't seen in some years, of Kinney, who was a prisoner and then had a beautiful opening and is now supporting other prisoners. He's out, and he has his story to tell, which is so inspiring to those of us who've never been in prison, but recognize that there can be an inner prison. Kinney's story really is an invitation, and that's available on the website. So hopefully it's a very interactive, alive website for people.
And we're speaking in November 2012. What do you think the future has in store for us?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I spoke of Papaji saying stop to me, and how profound that was. And then the next most profound, maybe the final teaching from him that is so profound, is wait and see. And so in that there's this, it's the same as stop, of course. It's just, let us see the future. We try to manage the future with our theories of what it will be. And of course there are certain probabilities. We know that eventually each of us will die. We know that eventually the planet will die. But to know that, to recognize that, to meet that, and then to open to what is here is the same as wait and see.
And in terms of your schedule, have you any travelling coming up?
Well, we go to Maui. We have a group in Maui, as we had earlier spoken. I lived in Maui for some time, and we all have a retreat in Maui. And then after Maui, we take a group to India, to Lucknow, and then some people will continue on to Rishikesh. We'll go to Papaji's house and visit his house, and where he gave satsang, and we'll have some events there at Organic India, which is a couple of Papaji devotees, Bharat Mitra and Bhavani, started Organic India. I don't know if you're familiar with Tulsi tea and the different teas, but they have really given back so much to India itself, and organic farming, and creating these products for Indians and Westerners that are pure. Like you said, the river's being purified, so is the land. So they're a host there, and we'll stay there on their farm, which is just outside Lucknow. And I haven't been back in over 20 years, so it's a surprise to me. That's part of the wait and see. I had no idea that I would return to India, because Papaji was gone, and I was never enamored with the Hindu scene. I mean, I was struck and awed by India. So it was a surprise, and that's what life is filled with, surprises.
And is that scheduled for 2013?
Yes, it's in April. No, March. I'm sorry, March of 2013.
And when you're on Maui, do you ever get to see Ram Dass?
I have met with Ram Dass on Maui, a beautiful private meeting. You know, his health is not so great, but his spirit is beautiful. And we had also lived in the same area when I lived in California, and he lived in California. And we would sometimes send each other messages of support and love and appreciation. He was so important to our generation. When I was speaking of going to San Francisco, that's just when Be Here Now was coming out. And I remember reading that book so carefully and being moved and rereading it and getting it and then losing it, and it had such a huge ripple effect. So I bow to Ram Dass. He showed us what it meant to jump off the edge, to surrender, to discover something bigger and deeper than we could know from our past.
And will you come to Europe again?
Well, we're scheduled to be in Germany and Holland and Spain. I think that's the 3 countries. I've had to cut back my schedule a little bit. I'm not scheduling the UK this year, and just like I'm not scheduling the East Coast of the States, not going to New York, just because of travel. Travel is much more difficult than it was even just a few years ago, and the age of my body I have to respect. And I love visiting people in all countries and different cultures, because I find the culture itself is interesting and delightful, but also the aliveness, this universal beingness and wonder. This is finding oneself everywhere.
And I'm sure some, if not all, the events will be streamed.
Yes, definitely some will. And each month I have a global event called With Gangaji that's a webcast and a teleconference that people from all over tune into or later download or upload. I never know what those terms mean. Stream. And from that, then people interact and can get into groups, and that's been quite wonderful. And I found it to be a vehicle of intimacy for us all over the planet, spread out in so many different time zones. And we meet together and yet alone wherever we might be. It's quite extraordinary.
And how many will you expect to go to India with you?
Well, we've got a waiting list. We're having to keep it down. I think with staff, something over a little 150 people.
So it's something hopefully you will repeat.
Well, we will see. Wait and see. Since it's such a surprise that it's even occurring, we'll see. It's an unknown. People are really looking forward to it. And I know that it's the call of Papaji, and just to be in his space where his DNA, even though his body is long gone, is still present, still alive. It's moving, and I'm happy to re-enter that physical space, and really happy to be with people who are drawn to that also.
And we spoke about age a moment ago. How do you remain looking so youthful?
Well, makeup helps. Good lighting and rest, and I don't always look so youthful. You know, we all have good days and bad days, and I would say with aging, I notice that the body is. I'm lucky. I have very good genetics, and I feel good, and I don't have any disease that really inhibits me greatly. So I feel very blessed that way. And there is just the natural fact of diminishment of physical energy and capacity for physical work. It's physical is where I notice the diminishment. I don't notice any diminishment in emotional capacity, or a certain, I would say, an expansion of emotional capacity and this this ageless presence. When we speak of age, we really are simply speaking of the body. And with the body, maybe we're including the brain and the capacities of the brain, but we're never speaking of the truth of who one is. And of course, the body benefits from meditation. It benefits from emotional well-being. It benefits from connection with oneself in all forms, from nature. And I feel very lucky that I have a life that is filled with benefit.
Thank you so much for your time today. And the final track you're leaving us with is another Katana track, Living Truth, from the album Embrace.
Well, that's it, living truth. That's, if we're speaking of a dead truth, then that's something that's just in the mind. That's a concept. But the living truth is alive and vibrant, and that's what we discover in our own inquiry and in receiving something like this song from Kirtana.
Thank you so much.
Oh, this is so delightful. I'm so happy to see you.
And you too. And do send my love to Barbara and Tom.
Oh, I will. Thank you.
All right. I hope to see you in Europe next year.
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Yeah, I look forward to it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.